Good evening, everybody. I'm Barry Wilson, President of Hong Kong Institute of Urban Design, and I'm welcoming you here to our fifth webinar on experience in urban design around the world, local to global. Tonight we're focusing on India, and we have four very highly regarded professionals and senior people to introduce various areas of experience that's been going on over the last decade or so and some of the new projects that are coming. It's a really exciting opportunity. We're going to do the session in two parts. We'll have the first two speakers, we'll have a Q&A session, and then we'll have two more speakers and another Q&A at the end. Beside me, I'm sure some of you know these stalwarts of Hong Kong Institute of Urban Design. On my left here, Sujata Govada, and on my right, Dr. Alan Shiradia. They are both here to support this event tonight. Sujata is actually going to be a speaker a little bit later, and Alan is going to moderate the sessions and the Q&A, allowing me to sit back and relax and absorb all the information. So thanks for that. Let me kick off and tell you a little bit about our institute, because I believe we've got some audience in India, and I'm very happy to hear about that. Our institute is now founded in 2010, so we're 13 years old. We're a fast-growing institute, and we have a mix of all professionals, not just urban designers, but architects, landscape architects, some engineers, transport engineers, even surveyors. And the idea is that this is a place where we can have cross-fertilization of ideas and see a bigger perspective on how development might happen. Part of taking that forward now is not just to be in our own little box in little Hong Kong, but try and understand what's going on all around the world and share some of our experience and learn from others. So this is very much a learning experience tonight for Hong Kong professionals in our institute. This is the fifth time we've done this, so we're all starting to learn more and more. Our institute's got a changing number of members, probably about 300 at this stage, along with corporate members. Our major events every other year are the awards that we do and the conference and urban design week that we put on. And we're heading this year in November to a large conference that we're focusing on new urban mobility and how that's working in high density cities. So there may be something very important for you to tune into in those November dates, mid-November. We are also founding partners in the Greater Bay Area Urban Designer Alliance, which we established 2 years ago with our friends in Guangzhou, Shenzhen, Zhuhai and Macau. Got it. So we are the 5 founding members, and we aim to collaborate in disseminating knowledge about urban design across the China Greater Bay Area. So we're all very busy, and our idea is to try and give knowledge exchange a good chance around here, where there's a lot of different ideas of what urban design is. We aim to accredit urban design courses. We aim to accredit urban designers. And most importantly, of course, we aim to better urban design practice. So that's enough about HKIUD. What I'd like to do now is introduce our first 2 speakers to you. First, we're going to have Mr. Kunal Kumar. Mr. Kumar is an extremely experienced person in India, in the Indian civil service. He's been in the administrative service since 1999 and has 12 years or more experience in urban design and governance and land management. This is a rare combination, actually, of visionary thought leadership and strategic and tactical thinking. So in a position where we're always looking to influence policy, we have a really important policymaker here who's been using his experience to lead new ideas on the ground. So I think this is going to be a really interesting presentation. He's going to talk to us about the Smart Cities mission. which is the biggest experiment in the history of urban India, with 100 cities involved, developing 8,000 or more projects worth 24 billion plus of US dollars. These are multi-sectoral projects. They're diverse, they're complex, and I'm really looking forward to listening and hearing more about this, learning about this. Following up, we will have another eminent speaker in Miss Paramita Roy. Paramita is an architect by training and urban designer, again with extensive experience, more than 23 years, leading projects not just in India, but in the US, Africa, Europe, Russia, Middle East, all over the world. Currently, Ms. Roy is heading the Dwarka and West Zone Unit of Housing and Urban Projects Wing, or DDA, and implementing TOD housing and commercial projects. So she's going to be talking to us a lot today about transit-oriented development in India. And her expertise comes as a gazetted member of the State Expert Appraisal Committee. So she advised government on granting environmental clearance of development projects. So we got two really, really rich speakers to kick off with. And I think then at this stage, I'm going to hand over to Alan and let you kick off the proceedings. And you can hear from me a little later when we do part two.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you, Sujata, for such a lineup. It's a great pleasure to have a speaker. So I'm going to hand over to Mr. Kunal Kumar, and then we're going to look at the presentation. Please start whenever you are ready.
Well, I'll just put on my presentation. Thank you so much for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be part of this discussion. Just this hygiene check. Am I audible, and is my screen visible?
Yes.
Okay, I'll just put this on slideshow and right. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Perfect. So I'll try to keep time, and thank you again. I've always been very excited about urban in India. It was baptism by fire about 15, 20 years back, around 18 years back, when I was first, put in charge of a city as a city manager. It's called a municipal commissioner in India. And I really hated the job at that time. And I thought, for God's sake, I just need to get out of this place. It's a mess. And then somehow over the years, I've started liking it. And I then spent about 9 years doing that thing in 3 different cities. And now, last 5 years, from being a player on the field, now kind of a mentor or a coach role in the national government, and working with different cities across and different states across the country, and trying to support their ideas and their aspirations. I've always said urban in India is not for the weak-hearted. There is a Hindi song which says, "Yahan," it's about Mumbai. It says, "Yahan roz roz har mode pe hota hai koi na koi hadsa," which means, every day on every nook and corner of this city, you have some disaster happening. And that's pretty much the case in all our cities. All of them are in the boom phase. Not all of them, but most of them, where the pressure of a population, the pressure of aspiration is much higher than the services and the support capacity of the city to support that kind of pressure. So we are at that stage in our journey. However, I'll just zoom out a bit and then start with just talking about cities a bit, and then India's context. Then I'd go into what government of India is starting to do, is trying to do. Then I'll talk about the smart cities program, as you mentioned, and then I'll just briefly touch upon some data points about what lies ahead for India. all of us understand this bit. If there were no labor markets, we would not have had cities. Markets have been common, and so has been trash from the dawn of cities. We may think, most of us have this feeling, especially in this world of administration and planning, that we are the ones who design, and we figure out, and we almost dictate the way cities function. But that's not the case. Cities are mostly self-organizing entities, and there are a lot of invisible hands, like the Adam Smith's in Adam Smith's invisible hand, shaping the market. And they are complex systems. There are a lot of interrelated parts which work together. Therefore, the whole is always better than the sum, or some of the parts. And cities do continuously change. We have this example, New York reinventing itself again and again, from textile to technology to finance. We have a reverse example from the same geography of Detroit, which went from a motor city to bankruptcy and then is trying to reinvent itself now. Two examples from India. One is Bangalore, where investments in public infrastructure then led to heavy industries, and now to the IT boom that we see in that city. For obvious reasons, it's called the Silicon Valley of the country. And then the reverse example in our own country, where Kanpur, a city which was flourishing in the 1970s, suddenly got stuck when the nationalization of textile mills happened, and then it could never recover from that shock because of those ingredients which really make a city work. And that's been the case across, that adaptive cities survive and thrive, and the others are not able to make it. Very few cities really die, as we say, completely wipe out. They shrink, they diminish in size, they lose character. And that has happened across, not only in India, but across the world. And it's another whole area of work to talk about what makes a city adaptive and therefore survive and thrive. But yes, generally, this is what the science says, that those cities who are continuously being able to enhance their agglomeration effects and are able to mitigate the congestion effects make better cities in the long run. Now, if you look at India's position right now, there was a time in the early 2000s when populations used to live very scattered around towns. What has gradually happened is we are seeing large concentrations of populations move to bigger areas. Now, today, more than 60% of the population lives in cities which more than 500,000 in population. This was significantly lower in the early 2000s, and is going to increase in the future. Now, if you look at growth rates, we are looking at a growth rate of around 2 to 3%, which is just below African growth rates. And therefore, our urban growth rates are much higher compared to other parts of the world. If you look at India's urban versus rural population, currently, yes, we have a higher percentage of population living in rural areas. Sometime in the early 2040s is when officially we say that we would be, our urban population would equal the rural population, and then by 2055, 60% of our population should be living in urban areas. When our national population should be around 1.65 billion, and then we may, at the end of the century, taper down, and then 80% of the population. So this is the century for cities. Not only in India, across the world. I don't think there will be city building happening next century. By all means, based on current data and extrapolations, it seems all the city building will be done by this century. Now, if you look at this data, there's a big story in this data, in fact, but the fact is these comparisons, the comparisons with other countries is very difficult, because the way each country measures its urban population is very different. In India, we have a very stringent definition of what is urban. But if you go by the Mexican definition or the Chinese definition, we are almost 60% or 70% urban already. So we have to take these numbers with a pinch of salt. The other thing is that we are going through a phase of demographic dividend, where the working age population is greater than the population of dependents. And this is going to be a phase where we are going to be in for the next 3 decades. This has traditionally been the phase, even if you look at Japan, South Korea, a lot of the Western countries, where the maximum growth has been seen in those 2 or 3 decades. And if you see the similar trends in India, we should be seeing the most amount of growth. Certain projections show a growth rate of 7.6% or 7.8% CAGR for the next 2.5 decades in the country going forward. However, all said and done, there is a disheartening story as far as percentage investment in urban infrastructure is concerned. We've still not been able to manage significantly higher numbers of investment. Currently, 0.68%, 2018 figures, we should be around 0.7% now as far as capex in urban areas goes. And therefore, we have a lot of problems on our hands. 17% of our population still lives in slums. 1/4 of our waste is still not processed. 30% of our houses still not get water. A large part of our people don't have access to public transport. And urban planning and urban design is something that is still very distant as professions, which are reasonably well practiced in cities. As far as capability to go to the market to raise resources, almost only 1% of our towns seem to have that capacity. So there's a fair bit of work that needs to be done. Now, in this situation, there has been, in fact, if you look at a landmark, which I've not covered in my slides, a landmark moment has been the early 1990s, in fact, 1992, when the 74th Amendment to the Constitution of India recognized cities as the third tier of government. From that time onwards, and then 2005, when the Jawaharlal Nehru National Urban Renewal Mission was the first time heavy investment into cities was planned. And then came 2014, when different programs, the government of India actually pushed its strategy on urban further and increased its investment almost 10x into the cities. Despite that, the number that I showed in the earlier slide of 0.7% is despite that. But still, if you look at the figures about 10 years back, it was even, it was a very sad story, because at that moment, we had come through we cannot really pinpoint one reason or other. It's also an accident of history, the way countries evolve, and therefore the rural-urban habitat evolves in the similar way. Now, if you look at our strategy, currently, there are a lot of programs which are being implemented in almost all the cities of the country, which are related to affordable housing, sanitation, water, provision of livelihoods, etc., etc. 100 cities are being looked at as laboratories for trying out new ideas as smart cities. About 27 cities currently are looking at metro rail projects, and by the end of the next year, we should have the second highest number of metro rail kilometers in the world, apart from China. US will then be in third position. There are a lot of things that the government of India is trying to push in a collaboration with states and cities. For example, master planning, local area planning, town planning schemes, the way Gujarat does, the way Japan does, online construction permission systems, transit-oriented development. Then it's about land value capture, transferable development rights, etc., etc. So these are just a flavor. I've just tried to give a flavor in this slide of the kind of stuff that we're looking at as part of reforms and initiatives. Then, if I go next to the Smart Cities Mission, the program that I head, as you saw, this is one of the bouquet of programs that the Government of India has, and this was a unique program in the sense that it looked into selection of cities through a process of competition. 4 rounds of competition happened from 2015 to 18. 100 cities were selected. They are doing a mix of both what is called area-based development and pan-city development, where area-based development is retrofitting or redevelopment of greenfield of a particular area in the city, transforming it in all senses, both physical and IT infrastructure. Whereas the pan-city projects are across the city, but are mostly citywide smart solutions using technology as a large component of the project. Now, if you look at the kind of projects that are happening, they're related to safety and security, non-motorized transport, stormwater drainage, etc., etc. So all on the left side are the projects that are happening under the mission. And on the right side are investments that were expected to be made in Indian cities by the Urban Infrastructure, by the High-Powered Expert Committee in 2011. And what we see is both the mission and the expectations are a perfect match with each other. For the first time, an SPV has been introduced, a new form of governance, um, where a special purpose vehicle was created for implementation of projects for the smart city. And this has had its own pros and cons, but one of the things that we've seen is that if you look at the performance of municipalities across big and small towns, the capacity of bigger towns is definitely higher than the capacity of smaller towns. But in the case of SPVs, it seems to have the difference seems to have flattened out, which means probably there is a case for higher institutional experimentation, and probably there's a case that SPVs are doing better than the municipal corporations themselves because of the governance structure and the financial structure that they have. One of the things that we have realized in the smart cities mission, and I've not gone into the broad numbers, but I have not put them in the slides. You were mentioning about those numbers, $24 billion worth of projects, 100 cities. We've already completed close to around $14 billion worth of projects, and the rest are on track for completion till June of next year. But there's a lot that we're trying to do in softer elements. It's not only about doing new streets, it's about doing streets which are smart, which are smart in the way we define them in the context that they are being created. Now, that requires change in policies, that requires change in infrastructure, it requires revamping processes, it also requires you to deal with wicked problems. For example, you can build streets, you can do everything else, but how do you get people to actually embrace cycling, walking, and public transport? So you have to work across all these 4 dimensions. And therefore, all the work that is happening under the Smart Cities mission is pretty in a uncharted territory where you're trying to create new templates for how things should be done, not only what is being done, but how things should be done. And what we've realized that because it's a very bottom-up mission, it's very bottom-up. Most of the projects that are happening are being developed in collaboration with communities, are being sort of conceived and then developed and then actually being implemented with collaboration with communities. What we've seen is the kind of projects that have emerged are very across the board, very inclusive for all abilities, people with all abilities, ages, and gender. And one of the things that we've always struggled with in the urban domain, there was a time in the early 2000s in India when PPPs, public-private partnerships, were peaking, because that was the initial phase, and suddenly everything hit a rough road, and things start to get stuck, and then you realize that it is not working, and there are a lot of changes that are required. And over the last sort of 2007 to the 16, 17, that phase, a lot of PPPs actually did not take off. And so the entire momentum on PPPs went down. But came the mission, and under the Smart Cities mission, you can see the different kinds that public-private partnerships have been able to successfully deliver. There's this flavor on this screen. And what we've also seen is that smart city governance, the way these 100 cities are now operating, is not only about the government. It's about 360-degree engagement, not only with the community, but with academic and research institutions, with the industry, and with academia, as I said, and government, people, academia, and industry working together. And there are n number of examples of how things have really happened and are sustainable and are being used because the 4 entities came together. And so this has been something that the Smart Cities mission has really been able to create as a template. As I said, the laboratories and the templates that we create in these cities are going to be used in other cities, and this is definitely one of the good learnings that we have. And another thing that we have realized is that when you are in uncharted territory, you're talking of smart city development, you're not talking of something that has been done in Amsterdam or Madrid and trying to replant it in India. You're trying to develop something new in the context that smart is something which is contextually workable. Something which works in your context has to be smart. If it is not working in your context and you're just planting it from somewhere else, it's not smart. So the best way to learn is by solving problems. So success in solving problems is creating capacity. It's not vice versa. And that's why peer-to-peer learning is important. And a lot of deployment of technology, over $3 billion of technology investments over the last 3 to 4 years is what we've seen in these 100 cities, and it's still growing. And this is only direct investment. There's a lot of indirect investment that is happening. And these are the areas of work where technology is getting deployed, improving service delivery, improving efficiency of governance, monitoring outcomes, achieving SDGs, creating innovative solutions, connecting stakeholders, etc., etc. Cities have become excellent enablers and consumers of innovation. They're not only enabling innovation by supporting startups, supporting innovators, but also consuming innovation through different, procurement reforms, etc., where they can actually directly procure and try out new solutions, and they're engaging with the communities and innovators in a way that they can try out their solutions. And the other thing that we've learned is localization of SDGs is very, very critical. And that's something that we've been able to achieve in these 100 smart cities. And each of the cities now know which are the SDGs they're working on, which of their projects incident on which of the SDGs, and what are the kind of impacts they're creating. And by the way, the UN Habitat has documented all this, and we'll soon be releasing a publication of this effect. Now, that's about where we are. And I think I have done about 15 minutes. I have 16 minutes or 3-4 minutes left with me. One, we're looking at 2047 as a landmark year for the country because, obvious reason, we'll be completing 100 years as an independent country. We would definitely have crossed the 50% milestone of population by that time. We estimate that we would be a country of at least conservatively a $32 trillion economy. Annual per capita spend, which is less than 1% now, should be around 3% then. This expansion of investment would be close to 5.6 trillion USD over the next 24, 25 years. And if you look at that, so when I say 3%, it will be the entire investment, and 1.86% that I'm saying is the capex itself. Currently, what we invest per capita in our cities is $38 per capita, and this should rise to around $900 per capita by 2047. So this is a very steep road ahead, because clearly 15% CAGR in nominal USD terms is not a simple thing to achieve, which is probably not going to happen through incremental methods, but it will require a lot of transformational change in the way we look at urban finance and urban planning and a lot of other things that we do in our country. So we are at the cusp of a completely new wave of looking at urban investments and urban management. And by all means, I think countries like India, Nigeria, Indonesia, Vietnam is the future of urbanization the world is going to see. Currently, as I said, 33% investment comes from private, 17% from the local bodies themselves, 80% is budgetary support. This will transform over the 25-year period. 3% private should increase to 13%. Self sources from urban local bodies to 34%, and 50% is general budgetary support. So budgetary support should go down, ULB should become stronger, and private investment should increase. And these are some of the outcomes that we'll all aspire for. I would not delve into that much because of time constraints. One of the things that we realize, we are a nascent, we are a very initial phase of city development, sort of say. So city governance, so to say, because as I said, it's not been more than 30 years that cities actually, for the first time, recognized as self-government entities. 92 was when the 74th Amendment happened. So there is a fair accountability gap issue. There is an issue of institutional coherence, both vertical and horizontal fragmentation in the way our cities operate and deliver services. These are challenges that we will have to surmount going ahead. Institutional, as I said, institutional innovation is one of the prime areas of work that India has to look at. Probably the mother of all work that we need to look at, because we need to get the structure right in which the people who have to deliver have the powers and have the accountability to work with in an environment of accountability that they can deliver in the right way. So there are a lot of reform options, because slide deck will be shared. I just put them in, even if I'm not able to give them time, but I just wanted to put them for everyone's consumption. And if you look at urban planning and urban design, there is a lot of gap. Required numbers are much higher than what we have in our country. The profession itself has not really been looked at in the way that it should, because of a lot of even, I would say, the way certification is done, the way registration is done, etc., etc. But beyond that, I think this is one area where if you have to look at the kind of expansion, I mean, if my data serves me right, it's like 30-35 people moving per minute into India cities, and it's, we have a huge problem in our hand if we're not able to plan and design our cities properly. So this is one area that we have to look at. And of course, these are some ways in which urban design engagement should happen in our cities going forward in the future. Comprehensive, contextual, and continuous public realms, a bridge between planning and technology. One of the things I realize is that planners and designers need to work with economists and also technologists, because a lot of technology, like for example, GIS and digital twins, is throwing up a lot of data which economists can consume and create models, and then those models can be consumed by planners to actually plan cities. So this is where probably I'll stop. Exactly 20 minutes. Thank you so much for being patient with my presentation.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kumar. Great overview of what is happening in India. And we now go on to the next speaker, Ms. Paramita Roy. And we change scale, I suppose, I mean, from an overview to something which is a little more specific and related to transport-oriented development, if I.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So I'll just share my screen. I think Sir has, Kunal Sir has really nicely covered the big picture and also the administrative aspects that are involved, the policy making, the central government vision and the policies that are being done and all the various initiatives and incentives that are being put forth. I'll probably be covering the technical part of this discourse. So I'll try to talk about first the very briefly the principles, then the technical challenges. There are some administrative challenges also which I'll talk about, and then I'll also show a few projects that are being done nationally right now, and hopefully this will be useful. So I'm just going to share the screen. Okay, so how do I minimize the stop bar? Is there a way to minimize this top bar, because it's going to cover most of the screen?
Tim, she's asking for help.
The sizes. It's fine. The share screen.
It looks good.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay.
Okay, because some of the text is getting covered anyways. So just I'll start with the principles. I think India is going through the same learning curve that I guess the US and Hong Kong, everybody has been through. Sujata has talked so many times in her presentations about the mistakes Hong Kong did, Kowloon, and how they learned from it. We've seen so many American cities like San Francisco, the mistake that Bart did about focusing on park and ride and then realizing that it doesn't work and that transit oriented development is the way to plan cities and also plan your transit around. So we are trying to hopefully minimize that learning curve. So the national TOD policy actually is pretty comprehensive, and it covers around these 6 or 7 principles, which are very well laid out in the national TOD policy, which is also a part of the national metro rail policy. It's a mandatory component of the national metro rail policy. So it basically includes these 7 aspects: walkability, accessibility, which is of course a law right now, mixed use, having active frontages, providing public space for shared consumption of people, affordability, and public space and parking management. So sorry, I forgot to click. So walkability basically means equivalent distribution of road space. This is actually, I've tried to use projects which are actually implemented on ground. So this is Karol Bagh. It was a mess earlier. So this is Ajmal Khan Road after the pedestrianization and multimodal integration at the station. Accessibility, this is Chhatarpur station in Delhi, which was again a huge parking lot. It was like a 5-hectare parking lot next to the station. It was a nightmare for commuters. Now it has been planned as a wonderful, multimodal sharing space with a lot of pedestrian space, fully universally accessible, with all the modes like autos, buses, everything very well planned right outside Chhatarpur metro station. It's a worth visiting station. Then mixed use, Mixed use is actually quite common throughout the country. This is a shot of a project in Calcutta where you have projects which have a very judicious mix of retail, offices, some rental homes, and then they also have housing at the back, and they very neatly and well nicely segregate the residential and the commercial. This is very common in China, so it's probably day to day for you. But for India, because this level of high density development is happening around the country now, so they are sort of cracking the mixed use high density norms right now. So Calcutta, Bombay, Ahmedabad, Surat, some of these cities have really mastered the way to balance density, create vibrancy on the streets, and have mixed use as well, and also have active frontages and stuff. So this is an example of an active frontage, which is extremely important. This is probably one of the most important components of transit-oriented developments, where you have to have frontages which are active, which look on the street, keep the street safe and vibrant. And just making a wide footpath is not going to work if that footpath is lined with a frontage which does not have eyes on the footpath. So it's no longer safe. Women can't use the city safely if that eye on the street is not there. So therefore, active frontage is something that we need to legislate and probably update our national building bylaws. This is something that we are still working on. We haven't cracked this. And mixed use is also something, it's still being cracked because the current building bylaws actually don't permit mixed use. Most of the building bylaws today do not permit active frontages. So we have to work around the existing bylaws and really often have to fight a lot with the approval processes to get this in place. But it is possible if it is done and if it is mandated. So I'll show you a lot of examples also. Public space, of course, becomes very important because when you have high density, the per capita open space obviously decreases. So you need more access to open space. So every inch of space that is there in our developments has to be programmed for multiple uses. Somebody's going to jog in that space in the morning. Sham ko, the same space will be used, in the evening by children. In the evening, it will be used by residents. In the lunchtime, it will be used by office goers. So we need to have multiple use public open spaces. This is an extremely important component where, again, urban designers need to play a very, very active role in the forefront in creating these vibrant spaces. This is a shot of Cyber Hub in Gurgaon, which is also a mixed-use development. Then affordability, because a very big discussion that happens around TOD is that gentrification can happen, and gentrification has happened in many cities, and gentrification is not always bad, because sometimes there are ghettos of lot of poverty which is concentrated in certain areas of the city. Introducing high-end development in such areas is not a bad thing. You need a balance. Creating a single use, single income area is not a good thing. So for example, if people know Delhi or say Mumbai or any city, Ahmedabad, so there are Ahmedabad, not really, it's very, even Mumbai is fairly well distributed, but in Delhi, for example, you have some areas like South Delhi, which have mostly planned rich neighborhoods, and the unplanned neighborhoods like, say, Govindpuri, which is literally a slum, is where you're actually middle class and lower middle class people are living. They're not even poor people. So we probably need to introduce affordability over there. On the same hand, if you see West Delhi, Northwest Delhi, there's a huge concentration of very low income people. So over there, we have to see how we introduce high income, high density, high income, high quality developments. And it's a very big challenge because somebody needs to envision the city plan in that way, understand the demographics, understand the pulse of each part of the city to plan it. And therefore, creating those city level vision plans is very important. That's something that we are not currently doing. We are mostly doing development plans and master plans, but the vision documents that are there, which are created, are not really created as of now. So something that probably we need to work on. Management, which includes your public space management, parking management, because parking is something which is sort of the biggest encroacher of public space. You create a footpath, the car takes over. Cars currently in most cities think that it's their birthright to park everywhere, and this is not just in India. The same story was there in London, same story was there in all other big cities of US. So they all introduced parking management norms. They made strict fees, and they managed it through technology or whatever means that they had. And they created a public realm which was accessible by vehicles, but they were not taken over by private vehicles. So this is actually a screenshot of a street in Srinagar where they recently implemented parking management and priced it, and you can see how beautiful and well organized the street now looks. So those are the 7 principles. Out of the 7, I want to just stress upon 2 before I move ahead to the further aspects of codes, etc. So the 2 very, very, very important components of transit-oriented development. First is network access. So this slide, you can see, like, supposing, you have this whole as a housing development. In generally our master plan earlier, the minimum housing, group housing plot used to be around 4 hectares to even larger, sometimes 10 hectares. So a 4-hectare plot is a massive super block. And I know that China has seen the same problem, the super block problem, and they're introducing the network, which it would be actually nice to hear from you guys how you manage to break that super block system in Chinese planning, because that's something that we are trying to do right now, and it will take some time to succeed. So what basically happens with the super block is, if your public transport is on one side and your home or office is on the other side of the super block, you pretty much have to take very large detours. So not only is this extremely unfriendly for pedestrians and cyclists, because a person who could have just reached the destination in 2 minutes by foot will now have to take an auto rickshaw or something and go around the block. It's going to add to pollution, it's going to add to traffic, it's going to add to all sorts of things. So what we need to do through planning norms is break down the super block into finer grids. And this is, again, there is a national TOD policy. It doesn't really give the detailed norm, however, what is the grid that is required. So for example, if you're designing a cycling grid, that's probably 250 meters. But if you're doing a walking grid, it's probably going to be 80 to 100 meters, because that is the walkable size. This is something that I think is not currently very clearly legislated in the national TOD policy, and it needs to be. It really needs to be an integral part. Otherwise, we are going to have, again, large developments where people are again going to be dependent on the car. So we have to remove that dependency. The grid size, it has to be that you can reach wherever you want in 2 minutes. Otherwise, nobody is going to, avoid taking an auto rickshaw or taking their private vehicle. So that's one very important thing. This is just a screenshot of a similar exercise when the policy was being done in 2012 and 13 of the conventional approach versus the TOD network approach. So the left one, as you can see, this is actually a real place in Delhi. It's MG Road. It's Zone J. It's Southwest Delhi. So here you can see this NH8 is always jammed. It's always red. It's always full of traffic. And you can see that there is no proper road network in that area. The road grid side is like 2 to 5 kilometers. So the congestion is there in all the major arterial roads. So what our team did is we created a TOD-based street network. So supposing when redevelopment starts happening, so we can mandate the redevelopment projects to have this street network of 100 meters or 150 meters, whatever. So that was overlaid on the model. This was done using Cube, I think, by transport modelers. So the moment we did that and we distributed the local traffic, you can see that a lot of the local trips disappeared. And the NH8 jam disappeared. Only in few areas where connections were not available, over there congestion remained. So this is something we are doing in our current project in Dwarka also, which we are planning the influence zone plan, where this sort of an exercise will be done to figure out where we need new street networks in order to ensure that the high density does not cause additional traffic congestion. In fact, the new street networks will remove and reduce even the existing traffic congestion. So that's through creation of street grids. So this is a screenshot of a similar exercise done in Mumbai for the TOD corridor in Navi Mumbai, where street grids were put in, and this is for a railway corridor. So as we know, even in all continents, the railways, whenever it is built, it generally tends to divide two sides of the city. So when we are doing a TOD for a railway corridor, it is extremely important to connect both sides of the railway corridor first, and then put in those new grids through underpasses or overpasses over the railway corridor to reconnect both sides. And then, of course, even the side areas, so that the areas are walkable and small grids, those also need to be gridded out. So that's one very important aspect. The second very important aspect that I want to touch on, just two of them, is the issue of active frontages. Now, crime, street crime and the perception of being unsafe really affects the usability of streets, usability of public transport. And of course, it's a bit more pronounced in North India, but it is also the case in South India. There's nothing like that. So a typical street which has these setbacks and boundary walls is always going to feel unsafe and scary, versus a street which has an active frontage, which is going to have somebody looking at the footpath at all times, and people are always going to be coming in and out of the shops or the residences, so it's going to remain active. So this is an important change in the building bylaws and the national building code, which needs to be done. Delhi has already done it. The Delhi master plan already has this as part of its transit oriented development chapter and the building code, where zero setbacks on major corridors and active frontages are mandated on the main roads. So again, this is something that I wanted to stress on, because it requires major legislative changes in terms of bylaws and codes. And fire, of course, in Delhi, we worked a lot during the formulation of the policy. We worked a lot with the DFS officers, the fire services officers. And the officers actually told us that it's actually a problem for them to have the setbacks, because the setbacks are always full of parked cars. So they actually always prefer to have the road in front available to them, so that they can do the firefighting, because they also get a larger range. In a setback area, they might only get 6 meter or 9 meter. In an outer area, they may get more than 6 meter and 9 meter also. And obviously the movement is much easier. It actually works better for fire control as well. So now this is kind of the city realm that we get with these large setbacks, versus the realm we get without any setbacks. You can use that for footpaths, have well-designed streets with active frontages. Unless we have this kind of a public realm, pedestrianization and TOD is never going to work. So we have to work on the building bylaws of our country, of all cities. This is just showing an illustration, must be very familiar to you guys. So the active frontage is in front, and in this case, there is a fire truck access behind it, because there's a hospital building behind it. So you get the best of both worlds, basically. Now this, spins out more issues, because in India, nobody will really do this, because they are controlled by what we call ground coverage norms. So he's going to say, if I'm going to consume my ground coverage, might as well, put the shop under my building. I don't want to waste my ground coverage. So these traditional norms that we imported from US urban planning books in the 70s need to be now abolished, because these ground coverage norms have no meaning. And what it could be is something I'm going to just discuss shortly. So just showing the way the zero setback and the active frontage works, with your access for fire and for residential uses behind the activity. You can have arcades. This is Curitiba, of course, where they did this. This is the BRT corridor of Curitiba, where it was implemented in phases, but a very good urban design control plan was developed for the BRT corridor, in which an arcade was envisioned. So they codified it in the plan. So over 10 years, it actually took 10 years for this arcade to have a continuous presence on the street. But it happened, and every time a building came for redevelopment, they had to leave this arcade with the active frontage. And the access for fire, etc., was just behind the arcade. So there was seamless access given from behind the frontage. So it works really well. So I'll come back to this. I wanted to talk about this aspect, which I just touched upon, which is that what is preventing us from getting these wonderful things happening in our cities are these obsolete norms, which are basically ground coverage and FAR. Now, ground coverage, why do you need ground coverage? is it okay? Like, they have norms, we have norms like that you can cover only 30% of the plot. Fine, I'll cover only 30% of the plot. But there is no norm saying that the rest of the 70% or 60% of the plot, how much of it should be green area? Should it be permeable? There is no norm for that. So you could very well make your building in only 30%, but the rest of it you could just do paved, and you could do parking, which is even worse. It is environmentally bad. It is bad for urbanism. It's bad for everybody. So the norm is meaningless. So what we need to have instead of that is having a minimum green area requirement, that every project should have minimum 30%, 20% green area, out of which a certain percentage should be soft green to allow permeability and stuff. So this is there in the Delhi TOD policy, that around 20% of the green area has to be soft, and it has to be there in every project. And additional 10% green area also needs to be provided, which can be on top of terraces and all. But the main norm of having minimum 20% green area is only there in the Delhi TOD policy. It's something that needs to be put in all TOD policies across the country. And then, of course, having daylight and natural ventilation is something also linked with building bylaw. That should be done in any case. And anyways, Griha and everything, you need to have natural ventilation. The second norm, which is completely futile, is FAR. FAR should be linked only to calculation of fee, because actually the important thing of FAR is it is linked to money. So we should keep that linkage only to money. It should not be linked to anything else, because it is actually meaningless. FAR should be linked to demand, to planning. So when we do something like a local area plan or an influence zone plan, that is where we say that, okay, this is the rough capacity of the place, and roughly this is how much FAR maximum you can go up to this. You give a overall capacity stipulation. But having mechanisms which are restrictive and one size fits all, like the whole city has one FAR or the whole city has two FAR, it makes no sense. It needs to be looked at side by side, by location, context by context. And FAR is also something, unfortunately, in our country, which has created the control of FAR has created an artificial demand, because the market has been prevented from providing housing. And Bombay is the biggest example of this, that where FAR was controlled and various other controls were done, and which created these massive slums and creation of these suburbs and so much of traffic problems. So we should let the market sort of decide, and we should work with the market. Not like that you let it do whatever it's doing, but we need to have a very good, close conversation with the market and market demand. So right now, basically, the brackets that we have is that you have a Honda City, and you can only get the Mercedes Benz and Honda City as the affordable housing bracket, or you can get a cycle rickshaw. There is nothing in the middle. Like, if I'm just taking a parallel kind of thing, so in the housing market, there is nothing in the middle. Below a Mercedes, there is nothing available, and above a cycle rickshaw, there is nothing available. So we need to look at how to make this available through norms such as FAR and stuff, and also a lot of mechanisms that Curitiba has used in the past, like progressive taxes and affordable housing funds, creating municipal bonds for affordable housing through FAR fees. A lot of stuff has already been done, so we could look at these as we move forward. So now I just want to show something we tried in the railways. So we analyzed there, because railway was something that they had to be very judicious. They had very little land, so they had to be very judicious with their land, because like 2-3 years back, the mandate given to railways was that we are not going to get any funds from the center. We have to create the money that we are going to invest in our stations. Now, of course, that has changed, because the stations are being funded through EPC. That time it was to be done only by PPP and only by private funding. So the moment that happens, so every inch of land becomes valuable. So we did this analysis and had some very interesting discoveries. So the normal setback norms that we have around 30 to 40% of land just goes in setbacks, and that setback is normally used for parking, and it's not even required for fire access, because if you remove the setbacks and if you have a public road around wanted, the fire truck can move on the public road, and the public road is something that you need for movement of pedestrians and vehicles. Like I explained, the street network is required anyways. So it's a win-win that if you do everything on the public road and you have the plot which is now fully developable, the moment you move to this kind of a development, which is on the right side, you get 3 times more usable green space on the same plot. So these were the building codes that we used, which were very flexible in terms of use. So there were 5 principles that we used in the codes. Having no setbacks as far as possible, having active frontages, 5 codes that we used in the railways. This is the third one is allowing bridging of buildings, because the moment you have very fine street networks, the plot size tends to become small. So you have to have creative, mechanisms such as allowing bridging, so that the foreplate of offices and other things can be connected. Sometimes hospitals, offices need larger foreplates. Then wayfinding features, this whole thing of having towers and clock towers and elements that define your spaces, marker elements. This has sort of left our urban scape. It used to be very common earlier, very famous during British times. Now we don't see it. So the marker element aspect was also put in the codes. It was especially important for stations because the stations are very big city landmarks. And 5, but most important actually, is allowing the cut-throughs through large blocks, which are only for pedestrians. So this works very well because the retail can also be integrated with those cut-throughs. So this is something we try to do in railways. Now I just wrap up with what's happening and the way forward. So this was the earlier Delhi TOD zone, which was all the corridors. Now, however, only 12 nodes have been notified. This is actually not going to have a good impact on the city because TOD doesn't really work as a project. It works when it's done at this level. So hopefully we'll move back to this sometime. This was the first project that was floated in Delhi. This is the Karkarduma Station Boulevard, which is now under construction. Phase 1 is under construction. This is the Dwarka TOD corridor, which has 7 railway stations, and most of the land bank is available with us. And this is under planning. This is one of the projects that I'm doing right now as part of DDA. This is the Navi Mumbai TOD corridor. It's the regional rail corridor in east of Mumbai, which was done by World Bank and MRDA, I think 2-3 years back. And this is also a very good project. The railways, of course, is continuing. It's doing PPP, not doing PPP, sorry. They are going ahead with EPC right now, but eventually real estate is also going to be a part of it. So I must share the success story that we had used form-based codes for this project in Dwarka as part of railways, where we had used form-based codes and mandated those passages and active frontages. And this project fetched the sort of one of the highest bids, commercial bids in the history of Rail Land Development Authority. So the market actually really took to the form-based code really positively because it gives a lot of flexibility in use and it's very people-friendly, it's walk-friendly. So anything that's people-friendly actually works better for the market. So I'll close with 3 slides, which are the main recommendations. So the 3 reforms that are required, the technical reforms that are required for good planning, which some of which are already being done, that TPS and LAP, local area planning and town planning schemes, need to be included as legal mechanisms in all the acts, and they need to include these principles that we talked about today of active frontages, street networks. They should be part of the guidelines of LAP and TPS. Building bylaw overall is required. We need to change our approach from the engineering-based tendering focus to a design-based tendering focus, because otherwise, I'm sorry to say, but in India, projects are led by engineers, while abroad, as you know, projects are led by architects and designers. So that's the move that we need to make if we want good quality cities. Influence zone plans should be part of master plans. TOD needs to be understood as a growth strategy. It's not a project strategy, it's a growth strategy. So we cannot do competing policies. So that's something that a higher level decision needs to be taken. And various master plans and DPs should have TOD principles. So administrative reforms are required for good planning and TOD. So, one very important thing that I think Kunal sir also mentioned, that these things require multidisciplinary and multi-departmental approach, which is currently not there. The systems work in silos. So those administrative mechanisms for partnership between departments needs to be created. And the technocracy needs to be strengthened and empowered. So besides the other stuff that others can go to, and this is the last slide, that there are some things that probably non-profits and agencies such as yours and government needs to work together to create, which is create a portal like you have the CTOD portal in CTOD portal in the US, which is a repository of data and best practices, which would be really helpful for the country. TOD certification courses can be created at MOHUA level. Handbooks and guidelines which are easy to understand need to be done. A rigorous feedback loop should be created so that the data that we collect from our projects, the learnings, can then inform other cities and help other cities rather than other cities making the same mistakes. And then create some FAQs at ministry level so that some misconceptions about the policy and the work can be removed. So with that, I'll close the presentation. Thank you so much for bearing with me.
We're going to start some question, but before starting question, we're going to do a photography. So we've called participants. So team is organizing this. Just bear with us a minute. We're going to have photography of. If you can turn your
Romy, you need to
yeah,
put a camera down.
and then yes, and you bring your camera on.
Oh, okay.
Angle.
Yeah.
And then yeah, the angle of your camera is not. We're gonna see you. Okay, that's much better.
Yeah. Sorry.
Can you look at? Can you?
I've barely slept, so I wanted to
Yeah, a
highlight.
little more the camera.
My camera is on.
Okay.
One more.
Okay, thank you. So we are now a few minutes. We have about 5-7 minutes for a few questions for the two first speakers. We have quite an overview and then quite a presentation that was in a detail. And if I remember well, Mr. Kumar, you were kind of interested in creating impact at speed and at scale. And with the mission, the smart city mission, I would just wonder how much the smart city mission has been able to deliver, I would say, change in terms of standard and norm. Because I mean, it seems that Mrs. Romy really kind of point out that this needs to be changed in a way. So how do we deliver change in standard and norm at scale and at speed?
Urban development, what she talked about in her presentation was largely concentrated about Delhi, Mumbai, Navi Mumbai. These are strong city centers. But when we are talking about smart city development, we're talking of large scale, speed and scale. That is the thing that you're talking about. It's 5,000 towns and cities of different capacities at different locations. For me, as the Smart Cities Mission Director, it's important that we sort of unbottle the genie, in the sense that we allow people to experiment, allow people to look at creating things and not bother about. If that shocks you, well, I would strongly say that at this moment, we would go strong on in getting practice happen on ground and look at standards developing, evolving along with the practice going forward. But in a situation where you've not really had much smart city development, you've not had street development, you've not had good quality water supply development in those towns and cities, the smaller ones, and all of a sudden you want to do standardization and norms, it sometimes has reverse implications. Now, that is one. I don't mean to say that norms and standards should not develop. And over the last 7 years, a lot of those standards and norms have developed. But what I would insist upon is a lot of organic development that is happening. And we're not trying to templatize and copy and paste standards that have been developed across the world. Some of them, of course, will be yes, but a large part of that will have to evolve through practice. And we are in pretty nascent stages of smart city development, and therefore standards are evolving gradually as practice develops.
Something to add to that? Otherwise, I will. There's another question I will go into that direction, which is to say, there's a smart city master plan, and that been created. How many are available? In a way, you mentioned that education is very important, and the ability to learn in a way from each other is very important. So one of the issues, like how many master plans have been created, and how many, for example, are available for review by everybody?
Okay, so once again, a smart city master plan is a utopia in many senses. A smart city master plan is something where we think that everything, like a industry, the blueprint is there and everything works according to a blueprint, and if there's an assembly line where stuff gets done. That's not how cities operate. You can have a broader plan. You have a broader forecast for the city. This is where the city is going to develop. These are the kind of industries that are prospectively going to come. This is the kind of investment that is going to happen. These are the areas where populations are going to rise. This is the kind of housing that is going to happen. But you really cannot templatize them into a rigid plan and say that this is going to happen and this is what I'll do. But rather be incremental in your approach and deal with things as they come in, so that you're able to be very adaptive with what you're doing. More so in contexts like ours, where if you, for example, you think that this is going to happen and you freeze it for the next 20 years and you make investments of huge amounts in those areas, and suddenly you find that that really didn't happen. You wasted a lot of resource-rich countries, and therefore we need to have those resources flowed into areas where actual development is happening. So it's a mixed bag. It's smart city planning has to be incremental in a way that it responds to good models, good templates. Doesn't really hard code everything from day one for a long period of time, but is responds to and is adaptive in nature, and at the same time is very driven by the community. So you and I, through our own ways and means as experts, may think that this is more important, but the community may have some other idea, and there's a process of haggling that needs to happen, and then each of them convinces each other, and there is some activity which is taken up as a pilot or a POC or a design, and then that is then taken forward. So this is a two-way process. This is a adaptive process. I don't think smart cities should be really looking at big master plans for the last 20 years or so. That's how I look at this.
Okay, so a question for Mrs. Rowe in a way. So, Mr. Kumar kind of talk about accountability, and you mentioned as well. I mean, what is quite interesting is a big use of form-based code, which is quite advanced in a way and progressive. So, do you see a relationship between the ways of three things, like form-based code, accountability gap in a way, and some of the kind of like a question about the use of GIS and data? So, how those kind of three different kind of aspects and the public as well work in a kind of like TOD? I mean, what is the gap in that kind of like relationship between form-based code, accountability, and kind of like smart city? Yeah, that's for me.
I don't really understand the question, but I'll try to address it what I've understood. Accountability is something linked to public processes, and the users have to be kept in mind, and the users have to be consulted. In government, generally, we have a very, very rigorous process of public engagement, which we cannot avoid. It's under the various state planning acts and DD Act, etc. We have to do public consultation. One thing we found very interesting when we were working in the railways was that we realized that development and market actually wants to be people friendly. It wants to be public friendly. And what is the reason for that? Because people are your spenders. So if your spenders and your visitors are not happy, are not comfortable, are not safe, so development is not going to happen. So it was automatically it was public friendly, and we also had a very well laid out process of consulting with the local body and stuff. So that was done. We cannot avoid it. It is part of our norms and acts, and it's our duty. We have to do it. I didn't understand the second part of your question. The linkage of
That's answer my question, so that's very good. I just want to take a challenge in a way for TOD in a way. Of course, I mean, India is fourth in terms of urban rail, but it's still 1/10 of kind of China with having almost the same population. So what is the challenge to kind of rapidly develop TOD in India? What are the kind of big barriers that need to be kind of really kind of overcome?
Well, it's actually a little depressing because when we do say TOD in the US, like I had the privilege of working in the US and Europe, in China for several years. So when I remember when we were doing TOD over there were some things which were already given. For example, you did not have to worry about the streets. Every street would have a footpath, would have good public realm, would have shading. The public transport was pretty good, not in US, but at least in China. So we were not starting from ground zero. In India, we are starting from ground zero. So the two big challenges we have, firstly, is walkability. We have to make our cities walkable. That is the first thing. That is the biggest challenge, because everything else can be fixed. But investment in streets is the biggest challenge because it's money intensive. Yeah, and I think the rest of it will come. Affordability. Affordability is another, which actually is not only an India challenge. That challenge is there everywhere. But addressing affordability through legislation, creative legislation, so that we can actually create the housing stock that we require in cities is something we need to look at. And I think also the understanding of what TOD is in India is going to take some time, because it's a very advanced concept everywhere else in the world. But here it is thought of as a way of using FAR, but it is not FAR. So you can actually do transit-oriented cities with 0.5 FAR also. It needs to be walkable. It needs to be have flexibility. So yeah, there are a lot of roadblocks in terms of understanding and basic infrastructural requirements. So hopefully we'll get there, because we have very good leadership in the country right now. So I'm very sure we will get there.
Okay, thank you very much for now. In the interest of time, we're going to move to the next two speakers, and give Barry back the kind of like role of introducing the two speakers.
Thank you, Alan.
Because he'll be leaving soon. Mr. Kunal and
I'll be very brief. I believe our previous two speakers may not be able to spend the rest of the session with us, so I'd like to personally thank you both now, Mr. Kumar and also Romy. Thank you so much, but I hope you can stay a little bit longer. Our next two speakers are extremely experienced. One I know well and one I don't, but I'm looking forward to meeting you more. Both are going to mix their academic and practitioner aspects in their presentations. The first is Professor Arunava Dasgupta, who's an urban designer with over 30 years of practice, and as professor in the Department of Urban Design and coordinator of the Center of Urban Design Innovation at the School of Planning and Architecture in New Delhi. Professor Dasgupta is also founder and president of the Institute of Urban Designers of India. And I think that's a very good point for us to be meeting and sharing now. He's going to talk to us a little bit about making and unmaking and remaking of Indian cities. And after Professor Dasgupta, we're going to have Dr. Sujata Govada, who I've worked with now for almost 30 years. Practicing in the region, both in Hong Kong, China, and in India nowadays. Dr. Govada manages to share lots of academic time at both Chinese University of Hong Kong and Hong Kong U in the past. She's a founder member of this actual institute when it started 13 years ago, and is now practicing across India with smart city and urban design interventions out of her own practice, Urban Design International, UDP International, and also is the founding director of the Institute of Sustainable Urbanisation, where I think you're going to share some of the work with us that you're doing through that organization. So, Alan, I'm handing over to you again, and I'm going to sit back and put my feet up.
So thank you, Barry, for introduction. So let's have Professor Dr. Dasgupta to kind of take the floor and then present his work.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Or see me also?
Not yet. Yes.
Not yet.
Yes.
Maybe. I wanted to show you two instances of master planning. And as Romy just said, that we need a lot of transparency. We also needed a lot of ways in which the master plan can reach the public. There are various reasons. Some of them are pretty violent ones or pretty significant ones in the history of the city. This master plan is supposed to have come to practice in 2021. It hasn't, but there is now a new master plan which is going to come up which is coming up, or which has almost seen the light of the day, and it is for 2041, another 20 years from now. And we are a bit skeptical about what master planning does to a city. And that is the reason why, as an Urban Design Institute, we think we should play a role. Now, the next slide is actually about the master plan and what it has been doing. Part of the master plan has been stopped, and part of it has been told that part of the citizens have been told that we are really not following it, though it is a legal document. Some of our shops are, about 40,000 of them have been shut by our Supreme Court and sealed. And there are people who are talking about where is the master plan here. In some of these cases, master planning is also a document which is legal, but not necessarily being followed by the city because it is just too far away. And the 20 years of master planning is not necessarily helping the city to change. That is one of the reasons why I think there has been a little bit of skepticism about planning and master planning. That's the second slide I had. Can we go to the next one, please? Right from there, we have to get into this question of what kind of a city we are in. We are not Hong Kong, we are not China in many other ways as a country is. We are surely not Europe and USA. In India, our cities are about juxtaposition of different kinds of functions and activities. It is multi-layered, plural, and diverse. Apart from it being very complex, there are further instances of it. Apart from cities of juxtaposition, if we go to the next slide, we are also cities of prescription, or even a contemporary view of evolution. We are seeing different kinds of time-based layers in the city, and that I think is extremely important. Let's go to the next slide. We are cities also of prescription as prescribed by planners. We are told what to do and what not to do. The next slide, please. And that I think is an important dimension about how our cities now are getting so-called, as I said, master planned. And in the master plan, some prescriptions are given. Romy herself talked about the two problems that we saw, which has been happening historically, about ground coverage and FAR. And I think we should try and think a little bit more about whether master planning is the only way in which we can plan our cities. But in all this, next slide, please, we are also cities of accommodation, right? And in this idea about cities of accommodation, we are accommodating different kinds of population. It is not only the rich that we are accommodating, or the industrialist, or the shop owner, or the people who can afford to remain in a city, but our cities do not have passes which tell you when to stop coming. We just come. And when we come, we expect we'll get a house or a place of shelter. When we don't get that, we build on our own. And when we build on our own, we are then again stigmatized or criminalized almost by saying that we are a slum person. Now that's the story in which we are operating. And I think we should keep in mind that that is how the overall country is today seeing what cities could be like. I am not in favor of this or that kind of city. What I'm in favor of is the fact that this idea about cities of accommodation should be good enough for every citizen that comes into the city. That's my take. So next slide, please. But in this idea about the making of a city, we are also seeing that there are formal spaces that we create, which we call cities of formality. There are also informal spaces that we occupy. We do not necessarily create even as designers, but some citizen finds their life within that. So that's the way in which our cities operate, as formal as well as informal conditions. Next slide, please. We realize that there has been so far in most of our planning in cities this idea of the distanced view, the view from far. And many of our planners sit above in multi-storied buildings above many floors over the ground floor of the city, and then look down and say, this is what the city should be. The other view is this one, which is an intimate view of the city by walking the streets, by walking the city itself. And then we say that, look, our city should be of a different kind. Now, between this distanced view and the intimate view, there is something called planning and design that needs to happen. And there, I think there is a lot of work we have to get into. Next slide, please. Over time, when the British came into our cities, we have seen spaces which are occupied by different kinds of people, as well as buildings. We call them robust spaces, spaces which are for different people. One kind of a robust space, spatial condition happened at the turn of independence in 1947, when a whole lot of millions of refugees came into the country, especially into Delhi, and we did not know where they will go. The DDA, as you've heard before, was given the task of housing these people. Next slide, please. And they created different kinds of housing. One of this is shown here. This was called refugee housing in Delhi. Most of my discussion is actually about Delhi because the rest of the country just followed this pattern. The next slide, please. From this kind of housing, we saw other kinds. That means that there were housing for refugees, which are pretty formal. There was a central open space, buildings around the open space. Some kinds of these areas became what you saw on the bottom left corner of the slide, which is actually a central open space, but no children. It was only about cars that came in. And the buildings that surrounded it started becoming buildings also of different kinds. Next slide, please. So we see that there are documentations or necessary areas which had to be put into drawing formats. Next slide, where buildings also started changing with time. 1947 is 76 years old, right? Or 77, let's say. We are in a bit of a dilemma on that, or 75. I don't know for sure, but the fact is that we are celebrating 3/4 of a century of freedom and similar kind of time period for planning. But our refugee housing has to be not just about formal housing with a hole in the middle. That is where I think we have sort of missed out on what really happened in our cities. Next slide, please. This is what has happened today in that refugee housing. We used to call it the Y-shaped housing at one time. You will find that in the planning lexicon in many different languages across the world. But our Y-shaped housing became every other kind of housing apart from being only Y-shaped. It had terraces, it had multi-storied buildings, it had garages, it had parking lots, tilted areas, many kinds. Next slide, please. So this is what we call as robustness in architecture or buildings itself. Similarly, there was this idea about robustness in spaces. Next slide, please. In that, we realize that there are very formalized spaces created by our own planners. We had a hierarchy of planning, especially in commercial areas, as well as in residential population. This is a plan of a district center, with the district as a unit of planning was used for a long period of time. This district center was called Nehru Place. The red area in the Nehru Place in the central zone is a place where people from the maroon zones, which were mostly offices or public areas and functions, would come down and have lunch. They would also come down for shopping. They would turn this area into a people's area and not just an architect's or designed area. Next slide, please. That is when Nehru Place started having what is called the central open space area for people. The gray areas all around it are actually parking. This is one of the first instances, not first, many instances of urban design where we find that there is a internal protected pedestrianized space with vehicles surrounding it. And this kind of quiet urbanism is what urban design was primarily trying to do across the country. I call it quiet because it wasn't really recognized. But I call it urban design because I know what went behind it. And all that you see as maroon and as red borders are actually not one building, but many slices of small buildings which have been unified together by the creation of unified building bylaws. That to me is urban design. And I feel that urban design happened for a long period of time in this country, in this city, right from the capital downwards. Next slide, please. This is what that central space is. And that central space is about people. The buildings that you see on both sides of this central space are not one building. There are many buildings with a colonnaded ground floor and a sort of, colonnaded as well as a balcony-based first floor. This is also one of the earliest examples of Asia's biggest computer market in the country and in this continent, and because of which we had this entire idea of trade coming into this place. The upper areas are all offices, and these places now are what we call as people's squares and spaces in the city. So to me, this is a part of placemaking. People came here to find work for their own offices, but they also found work for selling and trading. And next slide, please. And in this trading, they found what they could trade for or what they could trade in. And our trading is not only limited to showrooms and bazaars of all kinds. Our trading is also in markets as well as in squares. And people come there to be able to find what they could get more easily. Next slide, please. We will see these examples time and again. But after designers came into the picture much more strongly, we started realizing the sanitization of these spaces. Next slide, please. This is also a very, very popular space in Delhi. It is, you might have been going there as visitors. This was called the India Habitat Center. Most of our habitat-based offices are here. But if you look into this space, you will not find a single person. They're all seemingly hidden somewhere. Inside the walls, inside air conditioning, in the basement, within the cars, but they're all there. As a plan form, it is not very different from Nehru Place. But this was how we have been progressing over time in terms of our own designs, from the more sophisticated and informal to the sophisticated and formal. Next slide, please. This is the southern, or let's say the northern side of Nehru Place itself, where the metro came in. And when the metro came in, multiplexes also did. So did food courts and parking. And we would realize that we had to create more and more spaces to house them all together. Next slide, please. That is when we understood the value of new building types. And these new types created new architecture. But on all the cases, we realized that these were creating spaces where people could go into, but not places where people would go around. And that is where I think there was this difference between architecture and the city. Next slide, please. So this is a multiplex. It came up at the same time. And I'm again saying that it is just the backside. We call it the backside. Today, it is also the front side of Nehru Place. So in Nehru Place, you knew where the people were. In this kind of architecture, you know where the cars are. And that is the progression that has happened in this city over time in centuries. Next slide, please. This is what a site becomes. The site was a district center site, very much like what Nehru Place could have become. But by the time it became a Nehru Place, it also became a place for malls, shopping malls. And that shopping mall was mostly in Gurgaon. It had to be housed in Delhi. Delhi had already given their land to district centers, and now malls had to be accommodated. While malls were getting accommodated, they were all inside a building. The outside was only a part of landscape. Now, in a master plan, we have been looking at various kinds of hierarchies. The district center for commercial areas, and let's say community parks and district parks for recreational areas. Next slide, please. So we now know that that kind of a district center-based idea of a city is also a mall-based city today. And now in this area called the Saket District Center, I can have as many as 3 to 4 malls serving people who want to go into malls rather than be in plazas. So do we need a plaza anymore in India? Should we have squares? Should we have a city only of malls and multiplexes? These are questions that are coming up to all of us, and we are trying to deal with them. Next, please. We are also creating our own breed of professionals who create different kinds of landscapes, both daytime landscapes, nighttime landscapes, but in such areas where people will be thronging or coming. And in Delhi, especially with this climate, there are more people wanting nighttime landscape rather than daytime ones. Next, please. But we are breeding, as I said, professionals. We wanted to do quiet urbanism, and in part of these areas, these quiet urbanistic ideas did come into play. In a community center like where we go nowadays around the city, or in parks like these, we will find that part of it is inhabited by people. That is when the park was called mixed-use park. There is history, there is biodiversity, there is informal activity, and there is people. Or we get today professionally designed parks designed by great landscape architects, but not with a single people. Now, what kind of city do we want? The left one or the right one? We are producing designers of all kinds, but this is what we are resulting in. And I think this is what we also should be able to see more critically. Next, please. I should wind up now. This is also another kind of open space. It is called the Maidan. The Maidan is a kind of space which is not a playground. It is not a park. It is not a plaza. It is not any of these things. Next, please. But it is also about many things. It is about political rallies. It is about rituals. Next, please. We will find that there are many instances where open spaces are used, and used very, very vehemently by people, but not necessarily recognized, or even by rituals, but not necessarily recognized in design. Next, please. So all of this, the informal city, the ordered one or the chaotic one, or the formal one, are part of our design vocabulary. Urban design in our country has embraced all of this, and we hope that this will become part of our language later. I'll see one more slide if it is something pertaining to discuss, or we can wind up. Next, please. When we got independence, next slide, our Prime Minister, the first Prime Minister of the country, told us the kind of development we will have. And in that kind of development, somehow we forgot that we were also part of a traditional civilization. And in that discussion, this idea about a modern city became a very important discussion. Today in urban design, we are discussing whether the modern city or the traditional city or both cities needs to get, thanks for the reminder, can get any of our provisions for a better city tomorrow. Next slide, please.
It's your presentation because we are. Can you please complete your presentation?
We can submit it. I have submitted, and I wanted to only showcase the remaining space, which was in 1 minute. I would have been able to do that.
Okay, go.
If you go to the next slide, we can do that.
Yeah, next slide.
We have a city today, a space inside a city. Urban designers deal with spaces. Next slide, which is actually about the idea of a formalized city. Next slide, please, or a traditional city. And we were wanting to figure out where do we lie here. Next slide. The British came and created a great city through their master plan. 1962 master plan was when we wanted this Food Foundation people to come and say something. And we created a space of colonial Delhi called the Central Vista. Can we go to that? The next one, please. So we can see that slide, and we can then tell ourselves, what are we doing to it? In this slide is where we are unmaking our tradition. And in this side also, this thing also, sorry, we don't need to go into any more slides. This is when the master plan, when 1947 happened, when we had this great urge to create a new city with a new space. And in the design of that space, we are now wanting to re-look at that design by our own designers. We had created Central Vista, and we said that we will teach yoga to the world. But we also were teaching this to the world, that our development of our cities can be controlled by one machine called the bulldozer. And that machine does not necessarily create great cities. The next slide will tell you what will create great cities. Next one, please. Thank you.
Professor Dasgupta, for your presentation. We are now going to see the next speaker, Dr. Sujata.
Yeah. Am I sharing the screen? I don't know how we're going to do this. How did it happen? Okay. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Barry and Elaine. It's a pleasure to be speaking at the HKID webinar. And I would like to share, I think, a little bit about urban sustainability and the smart city framework that we developed as part of ISU, and some of the work we've done both in Hyderabad and Bengaluru, as well as Amravati urban design guidelines, and end with a few key takeaways. I think urbanization, as we've seen even in earlier presentations, is going to be rampant. And by 2100, it's predicted that 85% of the world's population will live in cities. And I would like to ask, do we really want that? India is supposed to have 60%. And can we do something about, finding a more balanced way of developing cities? Do we need to focus only on creating large mega cities? or we can actually go into second tier, third tier cities and make them much more inhabitable. So there's not so much of a migration into bigger cities. And of course, it's good to see even in Mr. Kunal Kumar's presentation about the Sustainable Development Goals. And it's good to keep those as a reference. But I would actually like to have an 18th goal, if they can come up with, which could be conscious living and spirituality. I think unless we are aligned that way, I don't think we're going to change cities too much. Urban sustainability, I think there are few things that are important. Sustainable planning and urban design. Urban design needs to become an integral part of planning. And also, I think this balance between urban, peri-urban, and rural areas, rather than letting everybody just massively come into the big cities and create undue pressure. A little bit more focus on the peri-urban cities would be good, the second and third tier cities. And also promote active mobility and also public transit use, which is happening. But I think public space is extremely important, which we've learned even from the pandemic, that people actually prefer to be out in the open spaces. And the more amount of public spaces, I think the better for the city. And also using the renewable resources, but also mixed use development should be promoted so that we have more walkable cities. I think why walkable cities are important is because if you are able to walk, you can breathe the air. Otherwise, you can't walk. So you can't have a polluted city and then expect people to walk. So that's why I think using the human beings as a measure and also making them be able to walk in the cities, that the pollution should be under control, congestion should be under control, so quality of the air should be better. And cities like London have put in the congestion charge and learned how to make their cities better. I think some of these kind of strategies could be used in India as well, and also strategic implementation and governance. And I know we've heard about Smart City Mission, we've also heard about TOD and the remaking and unmaking of cities, but I just wonder why the smart city and then TOD can actually work together, maybe to produce even better cities. So this is the idea of having a little bit more emphasis on the second and third tier cities so that you would have less of a migration towards the urban areas, and the rural folk also can find an intermediate place in between. Another thing which I found quite interesting is the Sustainable Cities Index by Arcadis Group. And what when they've done this most recent one in 2022, they found that most of the European cities, actually except Tokyo, came in the top 20. And cities and a lot of US cities, they use the planet, people, and profit as the measuring pillars, to measure and assess these cities. And they found that most US cities are dominant and in the profit pillar, but they don't do very well in people and planet pillar. And a lot of the Indian cities are actually in the lower end, and they have a lot more work to do to actually get to the upper levels, or like the European and other cities. This is a smart city framework which we developed when we did some of the smart city research for Hong Kong, which has been published in various books. The reason is, like, when you talk about smart city, somehow the jargon out there is that somehow technology will solve all problems. But I really think that good smart thinking, making good decisions, good planning and design are critical. And a focus on the people, place, and planet becomes primary focus, and then technology can be an enabler. And by doing this, we actually managed to put in the infrastructure as part of the 6 elements, in addition to the living, mobility, economy, governance, and environment. And another thing that I've learned through my own spiritual classes and everything, and I strongly believe that unless we are kind of aligned, like through yoga, Tai Chi, whatever, and look inward, we are not going to get to a point where we are consciously living. And that's also important as a fundamental foundation for better city making. And heritage, culture, and image and identity becomes important, because then each city can be unique in its own way. These are some of the just visuals to show you what kind of like living, smart living would be, having good housing, but also for all income levels, but open spaces, and also like reclaiming some of our streets for placemaking events, I think, which is very important, and also the preserving our heritage and culture. The quality green open spaces to enrich the environment, but at the same time recycling renewable resources. And the slide on the Copenhagen Hill. Copenhagen is actually a sewage treatment plant, but actually on top of it is actually a publicly accessible open space. So some of these things can be done. But in terms of mobility, definitely focusing on walkability as the primary, in addition to transit and introduction of bicycling, because not too many, I mean, actually the very poor do bike in India. It's the middle class, I think, doesn't, and obviously the rich don't as well. So that's, I think, another thing the Cities for People was trying to do. And also accessibility, whether it's rail, high-speed rail, or even air access to different cities in India and outside is important. Infrastructure plays a big part, especially in developing countries. And I think examples like the one in Singapore, where you have the Marina Barrage, but it's also actually a very useful open space. And infrastructure, I think India is building a lot of road infrastructure, but what I don't see is actually building public realm infrastructure. And I think that's, equally important, and focusing on renewable resources. Governance, I would say 10 years ago to now, I think India is in a better position with its smart city mission and the emphasis on TOD. You have World Bank and also Asian Development Bank working in India in various cities. But at the same time, I think this whole thing about engaging the community, but again, working together to make sure the end results are actually visible on the ground, and they are actually making cities more walkable and livable. The other aspects of the economy, and I think disruption in economy has happened through shared economy, and I think this is happening even in India, but lots of emphasis on tourism, science, and digital transformation as well. We've also seen that the impacts of climate change is unfolding. We've seen it through extreme temperatures, a lot of floods. Delhi had its floods, Hyderabad, Bengaluru, and also fires, as we've seen in Maui and other places, drought in China and other places. Also, what did we learn with COVID? We actually learned that actually going and spending time with the nature is important. Open spaces are important. When we drive less, we actually make our streets much more friendly, and the air quality is better. Through remote working, we've actually learned to spend more time with the family. These are the things I think we should try to continue. And this is just about some of the things we've done. I don't need to dwell on it, but we've worked on various types of projects. And this is the Institute for Sustainable Urbanization, started in 2014. And but I wanted to emphasize on a couple. I will actually talk about Hyderabad because I come from Hyderabad. That's where I studied and grew up for a large part. And also Bengaluru. The Hyderabad is the Nizam and the IT capital of India. About 10 million population, 650 square kilometers, like smaller than Hong Kong. But the difference, I think, is it's known as it has a lot of Nizam heritage. And the other thing is, over time, it has actually been, did I do something? The high-tech part of it came in later, because Bengaluru was the original Silicon Valley of the place. But under Chandrababu Naidu, I think the IT market grew in India, in Hyderabad, and now the present government is actually taking it further. So some of the new things that they've done is like the Durgama Cheru, which was a smelly water body, but they've actually worked on it. I think they need to do a little bit more, but the bridge with the pedestrian access also is there. The Birla Temple is a beautiful temple. We used to live quite close to that before. And the outer ring road, I think in Hyderabad, one of the things is implementation has happened more, but the scary part is sometimes too fast of an implementation might destroy heritage buildings like the Usmania General Hospital. And also, but the one thing is, I worked on the Hyderabad Metro. It is actually functioning and people use it quite well. There's about 500,000 daily ridership, and there are more phases, phase 2 and phase 3 planned, which will make the city, I think, less congested. This is something what we did for the very first urban integration in Panjagutta, talking about how station access should be done. In Bengaluru, which is actually the garden city of India, but also the Silicon Valley of India, where I actually spent about 6 months over the last 2 years working on the metro rail project there. It has its own unique identity with a lot of gardens and everything, but implementation is on a slower track, although the airport is done quite well and is actually plans to expand it even further. It's one of the busiest airports in the country. And also it's a large IT hub, but there are also issues of flooding, like in Hyderabad, a lot of, but more congestion, I think, in Bangalore because of the ORR was not, I think, constructed properly or in time. And at the same time, you find in the newer areas, there are less open spaces. So these are some of the things that need to be addressed in Bengaluru. And it's good that the metro is functioning well. People use it actually, and there's a plan to increase that network over the next few years. So that's the Bengaluru Metro with different lines and phases, and it actually, I was quite happy that it is functioning well. I also wanted to share a little bit about Amaravati, where we did, which the urban design and planning architecture guidelines. We were brought in, actually, there was a master plan done by Singapore, Jurong, but at the same time, the city, it was the largest land pool in the history of India, where all the farmers actually gave their land towards this building of this new city. Then when the new chief minister came, this was actually put on hold, and which is like a little way, I mean, it's plus and minus because it's really rich agricultural land. So it's sad that all these agriculture land was put for development where it's black cottonseed oil, seed soil, which would take a lot more foundation and also construction cost to build. But the reason they picked it is because it's right next to Krishna River. It's almost like our harbor. And when we went in, actually, there was more focus on some channels they were working on inside, but there was not too much focus actually on the Krishna River. So these are some of the principles we developed working together with the government as well as some of the stakeholders. More public people priority, transit-oriented development, pedestrian walkability, and also social mix, looking at celebrating the heritage and culture, etc. And some of the visuals and images of how the city could be developed, from the waterfront to the transit and pedestrian-oriented development, the promenades, and different hierarchy of open spaces, how the vibrant street interface is there, and how existing villages are integrated with the new development, and how the hierarchy of the street network. Video, I don't think I have time for it, but I thought I'll share a few key takeaways. But before going there, I think it's better for me to highlight some of the people that have influenced city development over the years. One is Jan Gehl with his Cities for People and Looking in Between Buildings, an urban designer, and also Lu Tai Ker from Singapore, who talks about intelligent planning and design can transform cities, but you really need government support and vision as well, and strong leadership. And Charles Montgomery emphasizing the importance of urban design to create happy cities. Because if people move to cities, they're looking for a better quality of life. And I think equally important are these environmentalists and industry people, like Paul Hawkins has done many books of which I found like the ecology of commerce is the one that started it and actually talks about how we can go to net zero and how we can have better principles and restore habitats and ecosystems so that we can create societies for the better. And actually Ray Anderson, who is no more now, but his company Interface used Paul Hawkins' methodologies and everything and made their own company go from really a carbon consuming company to a beyond zero company. So actually with carpet tiles. In fact, I was there at the AIA film that they hosted, and I think everybody should see that. It was just like an inspirational movie. And Sailesh Rao is a good friend of ours. He's actually one who's really behind this whole plant-based diet, and animal agriculture is also one that impacts climate change. And his book on carbon dharma, which is, I think, freely available, is a must read as well. I think wanted to stress that for our cities to become really sustainable, you need that balanced approach between urban, peri-urban, and rural, but also a collaborative approach where you are actually bringing I think public sector alone cannot do things. Just public sector alone, they can only do so much. I think it has to have public sector with the strong leadership, common vision, policy, proper policy and regulatory framework, but also proactive governance and good governance. But the private sector has a role to play with more regenerative companies of various sizes, from extra large to really small, new startups, young entrepreneurs should be brought in, and the focus should be trying to get to beyond zero. And the other important factor, actually, even before the private sector, is actually the community, where people need to make better lifestyle choices. Education and awareness is important, not just about getting degrees, but about the critical urban issues and what kind of a role they can play in making the cities better. And this whole bottom-up engagement is important, and environmental stewardship. In that community, I've also added not only the local people, but also the NGOs, the professionals, and academia. Academia has a role to play, as well as professional institutes. Then the information and technology, the digital transformation that's been happening, networks and connectivity in a lot of ways. India has seen that they can even streamline corruption to a certain extent by making it more transparent. And the disruptive technologies, the shared economy, I think these and the triple bottom line is key. So yes, social capital, ecological capital, and financial capital. You cannot continue with just looking at 100% financial capital. You really need to look at social as well as ecological capital. And I think it is our duty. Carbon dharma means duty. It's our duty to create cities that are more smart and sustainable. That means including communities and making sure that I think first point is walkable. If they are walkable, you can address everything else slowly along with it. And I think by focusing on people, place, and planet, we can create better cities. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sujata. Just right in time.
One moment. Sorry, can I share? Did you remove it already? Or maybe one last thing I forgot to share. My guys reminded me. I'm trying to we're trying to organize a trip to India in November 1st to 12th, just before Diwali. And I'm not sure how many people will come, depending on interest. We will cover about 5 cities between Delhi, Chandigarh, Ahmedabad, Mumbai, and Hyderabad. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sujata. Now we have a few minutes. Let's take a couple of questions. I have 2 themes emerging from the audience in a way. One is should we have more urban designer position created in all the municipality and the development authority in Pan-India? That's one side of the question. The other side of the question is what about the smart city? Can smart city replace, in a way, master plan, which are not relevant for smart city? And can we remove and replace all planner? And can we use, in a way, smart technology to do that better? So these are the two, I would say, a little bit extreme side of the, because we have been having quite a lot of practitioners showing us a lot of like good practice, but in a way of delivering better city, that's kind of smart city as a role, or our smart technology. Do they help? What do you think?
That's good.
So, Professor Desculpa, do you want to take that first question?
Yes, yes, sure. I feel that your second part of the question was very relevant.
I can repeat the second part as well. So the first part is like having more urban designer in our municipality. And the second part of the question say, get rid of all the urban planner. And then we need in fact, we need to kind of put together technology entrepreneur and kind of like planner, and then create a new ecosystem.
Yeah. So as far as the first part is concerned, as an urban design practitioner, as well as a head of an institute of urban design, we'll always say, yes, urban design is the most important thing in life, right? But the fact is that planners as well as urban designers need to complement each other. We feel our cities are becoming bigger and bigger, not smaller and smaller, but become bigger and bigger. And planners bring in a very important skill of being able to manage as well as understand the operations of a city, which I think the planner does. And I believe that role should be continued. The problem that we see is that it tends to become a bit too macro. And that's when the urban designer should come in and play their role of making sure that the cities are still livable and communities are staying in places which are livable places to stay. So for me, therefore, your question, though it is in two parts, it is actually one question where does the planner do their job and how is the urban designer complementing that job? That's the way I see it.
Okay. Just have a small question away. And what role Smart City 2.0 may play into that?
Yeah, see the thing that Smart City 1 and Smart City 2 will also bring in is that so far planning was confined to big mega cities so far, but the Smart City competition has brought in two things. One is that it has expanded the scale of planning or planning application, as well as it has brought in planning into the domain of technology. So I feel that smart city as a concept is here to stay, and planning would advise itself to be more technology centric and therefore smart city centric. That is what I feel.
So I'm just being told that Romy is with us. So just a question to Romy, and it's about does in a way the Smart City Mission 2.0 could work with TOD as well? Oh, is she with us?
Romy?
I can't see her.
No, she's not.
Okay.
Yet. So maybe Sujata, why don't you kind of like get to answer that question as well?
I think I want to even respond to the first question. Obviously, I will not agree that all urban designers and planners should go and somehow every technology should just take over. My presentation and the reason for developing the smart city framework was exactly that it's important to have good city planning, but urban design has to play an important integral role, not an afterthought. Usually the way it's done, the planners do the plan, and then urban design is almost like a dress up later for smaller things. I think urban design has a bigger role to play because you need to think of the city in 3 dimensions. And when you work together, I think you'll come up with better solutions. That is number one. And you use technology as an enabler, not a technology to displace or remove planning and urban designers. And I think the other question, I really think the smart city mission and the TOD should actually work together. It shouldn't be like it's doing its own thing and then TOD is struggling and trying to do its own thing. They all should be talking, and it should be more area-based. So if you look at Delhi, what is the common vision of Delhi? People should be come together. And the one thing I would do, like what we've done in Manila, we developed the 10 principles where everybody, stakeholders got together and they came up with, these are the 10 principles for city future development. And you have something like that as a guiding principles that could include your smart city, TOD development, walkability, everything comes in. And then that, whenever you do your plans, you always check back because these principles are shared principles. They're not made by one person at the top. So I think that process, the planning and design process is equally important, and educating and making people aware. Because even in places like Hong Kong, when we tried to pedestrianize a street, people would fight saying they lose business. But later you found out is actually good. And I think this is kind of a thing, there needs to be a lot more education done. Then you can get better cities.
Thank you. Maybe a very last question in a way. I think it's a challenge of scale in a way. There's in India, like there's like first year city where we have talked a lot about first year city, like big city, like Delhi, like where most of our speakers come from. But there's as well, I mean, there's to deliver, we talk about the walking as being important, but as a city get bigger and bigger, I mean, it's going to be about really delivering at scale public transport in a way. And I think this is a great challenge. I know that India is kind of like catching up with the US, but US is not a reference really in terms of urban rail, and the ambition should be a bit higher. And really, I'm just wondering, what is your view? How would you see? I mean, if TOD, I'm not saying this is just urban rail, but if TOD, transport-oriented development, is really important, how to speed it up and how to accelerate it in India?
Yeah.
Any hint on this?
Sure. You want to go ahead with
Yes.
it?
Yes.
Okay. For me, I feel that the next Smart City 2.0 will actually use TOD much more vigorously. TOD was introduced only as an idea at the same time when Smart City 1 came up. But now I think there is a lot of debate going on about the success and the failures of how to put norms for TOD. So that's the reason why I feel that the two can come together. There is also this entire discussion that is going on now about last mile connectivity, which was never a discussion earlier, even when we made the metro. And that last mile connectivity is about using non-motorable ways of reaching my house or going to the station, either way. And there I feel there is a lot more that will happen as we keep moving on with the idea of the metro as well as the TOD in various cities across scales. That's why I am optimistic that future cities in India will not be car-centric. That is what I feel. And I hope that our planners are also hearing.
It's not so easy. What I found in my experience working, even though this is what we want to envision, the people decision making, right? They are worried about, like they might be, say, one or two people who are really gung-ho on transit, walkability, everything, right? But again, they don't have the support of the rest of the people because they think cars, if you don't provide a road access for people in cars, they're not going to like it. And they cannot take away the street from for pedestrians. That's why I think reclaiming streets for people is important. But again, providing transit of different levels, and even if it's paratransit, whatever, you build it up. So because these larger infrastructure of transit and everything will take a while to actually happen. But I think what India doesn't do very well is, which I tried to kind of tell them a lot, is what Hong Kong did too well, I think, is property development. Use the property development. I think Hong Kong got too greedy, but actually, if you did it in the right way, property development over stations could be a good way with
Yes,
mixed
it
use
would.
development that can avoid, like even in Hyderabad, you have GVK Mall and it's just a shopping mall. So much traffic around. I asked the developer because I know him quite well. I said, if you were allowed to put residential on top, he said, of course I would love it, but nobody would allow me because it's not in the norms. So those kind of norms need to come in where mixed use development happens, and therefore you don't have people taking cars and going out. And ideally, these should be slotted through your rail network so that they become places where people can easily access the train. In fact, when we did the Hyderabad urban integration, I wanted to connect the transit to the developments. At that time, they said, no, it is not safe, it is not good. But actually, I'm happy now. If you go, they're actually connecting it. So it took a little bit time because when we worked, it was quite a while ago. So 10 years later, they understand actually things, are better to be connected.
Okay, Sujata, thank you for those good words. I think, what is to say about India, as well, it's a very young country. Average age is 28, so which is kind of quite something compared, let's say, to China, which is 38, and Japan, which is 48. So will India in the middle age be a TOD and walkable kind of country? We're going to see that in the next 15 years, I suppose. Will we see that? And hopefully we will have other interesting presentation about India in the future. So for now, I'm going to go back to maybe a last word from our president to tell us about what next.
Last words will be very brief. It's been a long session full of information. I believe we will be putting the slides and videos onto our website, so you can access them again there soon, right, Tim? Soon. And then here's our plug for our conference in November, 17 November, New Urban Mobility. And I think this is also very relevant for India. So I would really like to maybe follow up with some of our panelists here afterwards and discuss how you can get involved in our conference, perhaps. And I think there would be a lot of interest from your students and academics and professionals in India. So that's my plug, with many thanks for the 4 speakers tonight. And we'll wrap it up there and see you with number 6, which number 6 webinar, I think, will be coming up in the next couple of months. So thank you
so much.
Bye-bye.
And good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. See you again.
Bye-bye. Thank you.